about some themes and you decide to pick this up, and I can little. Hey guys, welcome to BookBabeBeauty. My name is Erica, and if you've never seen any of my videos before, I love books and makeup. I especially love to give you guys a review on a great book that I just read while I do my makeup. Y'all, grab your tissues and get ready for some ugly crying, because this story is not an easy ride for the heart to take. If you like angst, then this book will shred your soul into a million pieces. Then patch it back together again with the most beautiful journey of love and redemption that you might ever have the pleasure of reading. While this book had promptly been placed as a priority on my TBR list, after reading my first book from this author, I was encouraged to get to it much quicker than I had initially anticipated. You see, I know I don't typically feature an author 2 times in a row, but this feature was highly requested by other fans of this author. And might I say, although I had no doubt in my mind that I would love this book, because this author has an amazing ability for unique storytelling and character development. I am so glad that I took those requests to heart, because even though I'd read from this author before, I couldn't have possibly prepared myself for the emotional journey that this story took me on. I'm finding that what makes this author's stories so unique is that she is able to take something so tragic and heartbreaking and make it incredibly beautiful. Regardless of the devastation that her characters have seen or endured, their journeys are always empowering and inspirational. Reading one of her books is truly an experience. But before I start, I do want to disclose some warnings regarding themes and topics in this story. The author already did a great job about being fully transparent about these themes and topics in her book description. But if you haven't read this one yet, you should be aware that 2 of the heavier themes in this story include child abuse and suicide. And if those topics are difficult for you to read about, even in a fictional way, then this book may not be suitable for you. Now that I've said all that, I should probably introduce the book featured in today's video. Today's book is called The Wrong Heart by Jennifer Hartmann. If you watched my last video, then you know I featured this author's book, Lotus. And I can assure you, if you read that one and loved it, then you will be even more amazed by this one. Not because one story is better than the other, but because her writing doesn't follow a generic formula or pattern for romance. Her books aren't cliched, and they certainly aren't stereotypical. They are, for a lack of a better word, extraordinary. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about this story, what you can expect if you decide to pick this book up, a little bit about the characters in this story, and some additional information on the author who wrote it. So, I am ready to put my makeup on, and let's get started. This story starts out with an email from a broken-hearted widow to the recipient of her husband's heart. Aside from the email address, she has no other identifiable information for the recipient, but it's apparent that her reason for writing is in her desperate need for closure. To know that her husband's heart, that she loved for so many years, is continuing to beat without her, that it is continuing to love. And as crazy and illegal as she knows this request for communication is, there's nothing more for her to lose in trying. Melody March still remembers that agonizing day that tore her life apart. She and her husband Charlie had been together for 7 years, married for 5. Even after 7 years, there wasn't a day that went by that she didn't still get butterflies in her stomach when he kissed her. The honeymoon phase never quite ended for them. They were the stereotype for what a loving marriage should be. They were #relationship goals. Yes, I said hashtag. On that particular night, the one that Melody would never forget, she and Charlie were celebrating their 5th year of wedded bliss over dinner, with a promise for a continuation of their celebration at home. The two walked hand in hand from the restaurant. Eagerness for the night's finale stalled their progress home as they shared a passionate kiss in the middle of the sidewalk, excited for the possibility of starting a family together, but distracted with each other. They hadn't noticed that they'd become someone's target until Melody's purse was ripped from her hand. And being the protective husband that Charlie was, he chased after the culprit, who dared to try and ruin their celebratory night by stealing from his wife. Melody yelled for Charlie to just let it go as she watched her husband chase the thief down the dark street. After all, it was just a purse. But as soon as Charlie caught up to the guy responsible, a truck blows through a red light and slams into him. From the second that Melody heard the carnage, time stood still. And as she watched her husband sputter blood from his mouth, her own blood ran cold. And then, when she received confirmation that her husband had died, Melody's world ceased to exist anymore. Charlie died that day, and in a lot of ways, so did Melody. Because this story is written in the narrative of both the female and male lead characters, the reader is quickly introduced to a man named Parker. Parker's cynicism for life is much like Melody's became after the tragedy that she experienced, except that Parker has been struggling with the idea of living for as long as he can remember. He's learned over time that it's better not to allow human emotion to alter his view of the world and the monsters that lurk in it. And as he is tethered to the hospital bed, being injected with medications to inhibit him from hurting himself, he can only question why everyone is so hell-bent on keeping him alive when all he wants to do is die. In Melody's narrative, the reader can see how much she still struggles with Charlie's death, even a year later. Her friends and family are understanding of her emotional turmoil, but they worry about her. They've noticed the light in her eyes has diminished. She's distanced herself from everything that reminds her of Charlie, but with a bit of convincing from her brother, she agrees to go out for a beer with the guys, for old time's sake. But even with her best friend Leah by her side, it all just seems like a painful reminder of Charlie. It is then that the realization strikes her that she's not ready, and she doesn't know if she ever will be. Life has no meaning anymore, not without him. So, with the memories of Charlie and the nightmare of that painful night overwhelming her, she tries to quiet the storm on her own with a paring knife on her living room floor. I am at a stopping point, so I'm going to go off camera and put my eyebrows on. When I come back, I'll talk a little more about this story. I will be right back. I'm back. Now, let's get back to the story. When Parker and Melody first meet, it's in a support group called Loving Lifelines. Melody is there because she realizes that while she may have thought she wasn't ready to face life without Charlie, she knows she's not ready to die either. And Parker is there because someone still values his life. It's just not him. His foster sister, Bree, is the only one in his life since his father died who actually gave a damn. Parker's only reason for holding on to a life that doesn't hold much value to him is for her. But aside from going to the meetings, intended to help support those who've either attempted suicide or have had suicidal ideations, it's too much for anyone to ask that he actually participate in the therapeutic process. But when Melody stumbled her way into a meeting one day, Parker couldn't help but to notice her. He hated that he noticed her, but he hated even more that he started to pay attention to the words she spoke in those meetings. Her starting points, reasons to live, whether they seem trivial or small. Things that they would miss if they died. Her starting points seemed ridiculous, but he couldn't help but feel intrigued by them, if not for how unique they were. Melody seemed to be the kind of person that could find beauty in the oddest things, and that perplexed him, since there seemed to be no beauty in his world. At first, Parker's encounters with Melody at the meetings were irritating to him. To him, she was like the sun, intrusively trying to shine bright light into his darkness. For Parker, life was more about keeping himself busy so that he didn't have time to dredge up old memories from his childhood. Memories of his abusive, alcoholic mother when darkness became both friend and foe for him. With the help of Bree, Parker had managed to build a successful construction business. There was rarely any downtime for him, which was fine since he didn't have much of a life outside of work, nor did he want one. Relationships were far from anything he desired to have, and intimacy was strictly avoided. Women, in fact, were difficult for him to even trust. Every female that had entered his life to this point, especially in his formidable years, had always been the most evil that humankind had to offer. When Melody had first reached out to the recipient of her husband's heart, she hadn't expected that it would become an open stream of communication. And what neither Melody or Parker knew was that they were actually communicating with each other. Of course, Melody always conveyed her positive thoughts regarding life in her responses, and Parker continued his cynical approach in his responses. But they challenged each other to view life in a way they hadn't before, and their communication quickly became a starting point, one they hadn't known they needed. The more that Melody attended the Lifelines meetings, the more she learned about Parker. Not because he actually opened up during the sessions, but rather because she took the opportunity to engage with him during breaks. She learns that he has a construction business, and she sees the perfect opportunity to try and help herself make progress in her grief. One of the biggest challenges for her in mourning Charlie's death was that everything reminded her of him, especially when it came to the home they'd once shared. Every painted wall, every new renovation they once tackled, and every renovation that they never got around to. She knew she needed a change in scenery. Parker reluctantly agreed, if not for the money, then at least for the distraction to keep him busy. But being in close proximity to each other, outside of the meetings, allowed them the opportunity to admit that they were feeling something beyond what acquaintances from a meeting would, beyond even what friends would. But Parker tried to distance himself even more. His lack of relationship skills and, well, people skills in general had him often reacting offensively to Melody's intrusive generosity and kindness. Kindness wasn't a quality he'd been on the receiving end for much of his life, and it was a quality that seemed disingenuous when it was directed towards him because of his past. Melody, on the other hand, had been so used to the jovial and good-natured qualities that Charlie had. So it was difficult for her to understand why she was so drawn to Parker, especially when he and Charlie were complete opposites. But her empathetic nature forced her to try and understand the reasonings behind Parker's gruff personality. And her light eventually started to seep into Parker's darkness, little by little, whether he wanted it to or not. I'm at a stopping point, so I'm going to go ahead and finish up my makeup off camera. When I come back, I will give you my final thoughts and opinions about this story, as well as a little information about the author who wrote it. On that note, I will be right back. I'm back and my makeup is done. When I'm doing my makeup for a featured book, I always try and grab inspiration from the story or the characters or the cover. One of the things between Melody and Parker was asking each other about the sunrise and whether or not they'd seen it. I really wanted to focus my look today on something that was important to Melody and Parker's journey. Melody and Parker's story isn't typical of what you'd normally expect from a romance novel. This isn't a slow burn love affair. It's not an enemies to lovers type of fling. This story is in a category all on its own. Two people riddled with grief and the idea that life, at some point in their respective journeys, holds no value anymore. Two people who would rather end the pain than have to live with it daily. But inevitably, two people who gave each other a starting point. Something worth waking up for every day. Something worth living for. And their connection was the catalyst for every starting point that came after that. If you saw my last video featuring this author's other novel called Lotus, then you know that Jennifer Hartmann is a best-selling author of both contemporary and dark romance. I also stated in my last video that it seems as though she's pretty new in her writing career, as it looks like her earliest release is dated in 2020. But I will say this again, her writing rivals that of someone who's been in the business an incredibly long time. What I found out about this author since doing my last video is that not only is she exceptionally kind, but she's also incredibly humble and down to earth. She's an author who truly loves to engage with her readers. Sometimes a reader like me can get so absorbed in a story that we just want to show our appreciation for such brilliant writing and thank the author for sharing a journey with us that might have touched our spirits when we really needed it. This book is available on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have a KU subscription, you can read this book for free. And I always say it, but I'll say it again, if you don't have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, you really should consider it. I found that it's such a great way to experience new authors without risk. Aside from the monthly subscription fee, there are no additional costs for books that are KU eligible. I've managed to discover a lot of incredibly talented authors that I may not have otherwise. If you've read this book, leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't read this book, be sure to check in the description box below. I will leave a link where you can find this book on Amazon. And if you're interested in finding out more information about this author, I'll leave her link in the description box as well. And she's real cool, y'all. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you like books and makeup, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you have any book suggestions for me, please feel free to let me know. Obviously, I took this suggestion and I'm so glad that I did. If you're an author and you want me to read your book, be sure to check out my website. The address is listed in the description box as well. And either fill out a form or email me. You never know, you could see your book in a future video. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for your time and for your support. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Y'all stay safe out there, read a damn book, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye.